It's no secret that Cursor's been trying to cook their own model for a bit now, and it seems like they succeeded. Composer 2 is incredible. It beats out Opus in a lot of different things. That's why I'm so excited to show you guys... That's not the new Cursor model. That's Kimi K2.5, the open weight model from Moonshot AI. Why is that here? I thought we were supposed to be talking about Composer 2, the new model Cursor just shipped that is performing incredibly well and for insanely cheap. Well, that's what we were supposed to talk about until this tweet occurred, where somebody happened to notice when they were playing with the URLs for hitting things through the Cursor API that the new model had an interesting name in it. Counts AnySphere models Kimi K2.5 RL 0317 S515 fast. Turns out Cursor's new model might not be all that new. There's a lot to dig into here, from the actual performance, costs, and experience you can expect from Composer, to the weird building on top of Kimi that was not really disclosed and might be against their license, to the deleted tweets from members of the Kimi Moonshot team posting about this, confused, questioning things, and a hell of a lot more. This one's been a fascinating deep dive, and I've done a bunch of research ahead of time to try and cover it to the best of my ability. As y'all know, I am an investor in Cursor, but they are not paying me in any way, shape, or form to cover any of this. As you can imagine, they probably don't want me covering this drama too much. Never been the biggest fan of drama, but this one's important enough and has enough good learnings that I think it's worth covering and discussing in detail. There is something I am a huge fan of, though. Today's sponsor. Nowadays, it feels like there's nothing that Anthropic and OpenAI can agree on. But what if I told you there's one important thing that they do agree on, as well as T3 Chat, Vercel, Perplexity, and many other businesses? In fact, it's a thing all of these companies agree on, including Carta, Replit, Amp, Bolt, Vanta, and so many other big businesses. You probably know what it is if you've been watching my videos recently. It's WorkOS, the best solution for enterprise-ready auth. If you want to make your project ready to go for big companies to adopt, there is no better place to start than WorkOS. There's two types of devs in the world. There's the type that hear about Okta, SAML, Duo, ADP, ADFS, and more, and don't really know what they are. And then there's the type of dev that feels their heart sink as soon as any of these terms are mentioned, because setting all of this up is the worst, and every different company has their own weird implementation of one of these many different standards. And if you want the employees of that company to be able to sign into your application, you're either going to write a lot of miserable glue code and be the IT team's nightmare, or you're using WorkOS, and you can just send a link to the IT team at that company and they're ready to go. And I probably should have mentioned this before. It's not hidden in some dashboard. You can write code to trigger the onboarding. If you're trying to make it easier for real businesses to onboard into your app, look no further than soydev.link/workos. So let's start from the top. Composer 2. This is a new model that exists in Cursor and only in Cursor, which is a thing I'm not the biggest fan of for a bunch of different reasons. I do kind of understand why they don't want to expose this over API. It's a model that's only good for code. So even the benchmarks are going to be weird, because a lot of the benchmarks that exist, things like artificial analysis, which I love, have a lot of things in the bench that aren't just testing coding capabilities. And this version of the model will probably be very bad at that, because Composer is meant to be a fine-tuned model that does nothing but code, which I actually think is cool. It's nice to see this type of research going into a bespoke model that does just one thing that matters. But the path that they use to get there is where things get really interesting, in my opinion. I've been keeping an eye on the Composer models for a while, and for a reason that's probably a surprise to you guys. Y'all remember SuperMaven? SuperMaven was the first autocomplete AI thing that I used in my editor that truly blew me away. Copilot had moments that were really cool, but SuperMaven had this weird way of like learning as you went, where it would adapt to how you were coding. And it was fast as hell. It blew me away. It ended up being my first personal investment I ever made, where I wired my own money instead of a scout check, because I was so confident in SuperMaven, and specifically in Jacob, the founder of SuperMaven, because he came from Tab9. Tab9 was the first attempt at an AI coding thing, and this started all the way back in 2018 by Jacob Jackson. I was blown away to see him leave to go do his own new thing, and he more than succeeded. SuperMaven was incredible. There's still a bunch of people who dearly miss it. So why are we talking about SuperMaven? Well, spoiler if you weren't here at the time, SuperMaven got acquired by Cursor. I have a whole video about that, as well as an interview I did with both the founders of Cursor and SuperMaven in the Cursor office back when it was a tiny building with like 6 or maybe 10 people max in it. Great time, wild how much things have changed. They have like 5 buildings now, but SuperMaven was a great project, and it really showed what can happen if you try to do everything from the user experience to the model itself around specific focused coding tasks. And it's clear, if you couldn't tell by now, that Jacob, the founder of SuperMaven, is obsessed with making AI really, really good at code and nothing else. When he joined Cursor, him and his team went all in on autocomplete, which is why to this day, Cursor's autocomplete is just so much better than anything else's. It's the thing that keeps me going back. I've been trying to move to VS Code because, to be frank, it's a much lighter thing. It's less likely to cause me problems when I use it. I've been very happy with VS Code, just not crashing and being fast. But as soon as I have to actually type in it, I find myself sitting there waiting for the autocomplete. And when eventually Copilot does kick in, it gives a shit recommendation. And I'm just so used to using cursors because of the super maven magic that Jacob injected into it. But Jacob got tired of just working on autocomplete. Obviously, his tag complete was great and he had to build custom models and all of these things for it internally, but he wanted to go further. That's why he made Composer. Composer 1 was Cursor's first attempt at making a new model for full code generation from scratch. And I could see why Jacob would want to do this. When you look at his history building models for all sorts of code tasks, as well as the amount of data that Cursor has on chat histories and people building in these projects, you'll realize that he's just kind of set up for success here. He has all the things he needs to do something awesome. But it also takes a ton of money and research and people and GPUs to do something crazy. He still managed to with Composer 1, though. Like, that model blew me away. It was so much faster than everything else, and just, it was good. It wasn't great. It didn't have the, like, deep intelligence and understanding of my code bases that other models did at the time, but goddamn was it capable of doing incredible stuff. And that's why they kept on iterating. That's why he got to hire more. That's why they put more money into GPUs, more effort into curating all their data, and just did everything they had to set themselves up to make better models. But now there's the question of why. Making models is super expensive, and the chances that you can make a model as good as Frontier Labs at anything is very low at best. Why would they put all of this time into building something of their own like this? Well, they have some competition. I want to ask y'all a question, chat, and do not answer this question if you already know the answer. To everybody who doesn't, I want you to guess, how much inference do you think you can do per month on the $200 a month Claude Code plan? Like, if you were paying full API rates and you max out your $200 a month plan on Claude Code, how much money of API usage do you think you can do? Just drop numbers in chat. You're putting in $200, what do you think you can get out? Like 200, 500, 2,000? Okay, we see numbers like 2,000, 1,600, 3,000, 2K, 1K. And remember, you're paying $200, so getting anything over 200 is a deal. But you could theoretically get way more. So here's where things get interesting. When Claude Code first introduced the $200 a month sub, the answer was around $1,500 to $2,000, but they have continued ramping it up since. According to Cursor's internal analysis, their last year estimate was that $200 per month Claude Code sub gave you $2,000 in compute, but now the subsidizations appeared more aggressive, with $200 plans able to consume about $5,000 in compute. Do you see the problem here? That is insane. This level of subsidization is absurd. And I want to be clear, that's not going to last. Anthropic's not going to be able to keep giving you this insane amount of inference for that type of price. They can't. That's not realistic. They just want to price everyone out. That's why they're doing this. That's why they're subsidizing so hard. And for what it's worth, that's why we don't sell our own subscriptions in T3 code. It is way too expensive to hit Claude models over API. And that's why we let you bring your own sub. So if you're using Codex with the OpenAI subscription or Claude with an Anthropic subscription, you can use T3 code with either of those. So if you're on the $200 a month plan for Codex and the $200 a month plan for Claude, that's like $10,000 of inference in a really good interface. Just saying, we don't charge money. It's free, open source. You can change it and edit it and do whatever you want with it. But if you have these subs and you want a UI that doesn't suck, consider T3 code. Just saying. But Cursor can't do that. And there's a bunch of reasons why. The biggest one by far is that they have to maintain a good working relationship with both of the labs because they rely on them so heavily in their application. And a lot of Cursor's revenue comes from subscriptions that they're selling to giant enterprises that are paying for this inference through that Cursor subscription. So they need ways to reduce costs, because if Anthropic can charge Cursor $200 for $200 of inference, and then they have to try and find a way to justify that to their users, but they go and resell the same inference for a 25x discount to people on their subscription, you're kind of just screwed. And I get it. Like, I don't know how we're going to make money on T3 code. Like, we're not charging subs. It's kind of crazy that we spent all of this time and money and energy, effort, and space to build something that is making it so OpenAI and Anthropic sell more subscriptions and we don't get paid a cent. This is not the most realistic path as a business. We even make you install the official Claude and Codex CLIs if you want to use those. Like, we don't do anything over API or with our own integration or anything we can charge for. And I don't even know how we would at this point. We have things we want to build in the future, some of which might have to cost money, but like, we are doing this because we want it. Cursor needs to make billions of dollars to justify their billions of dollar valuation. They need to be able to make a profit off of the inference. And Anthropic is making it very hard for them to do that. So they need a wedge. We need to think about leverage for a second here, because Anthropic has a lot of leverage. They have the model everybody wants to use. They have the APIs everybody has to use them. And as such, everybody has to pay them to get the thing they want, which is inference. So what does Cursor have? Cursor has a large install base, which helps a ton. It means they can charge these people money and make some money. But Cursor has something else that's really valuable: chat histories. When you do an API request through something like Cursor, when you make a prompt in a thing like Cursor that is to go through their servers, and that chat history is a thing that exists. And if you don't click the switch inside of Cursor that says, don't train on my data, that data all goes to Cursor. So I would personally estimate that maybe half or so of all the Anthropic prompts that go through Cursor are going through it in a way where they're earmarked as usable for training. That means they have a shitload of history, a shitload of data of existing models that are really good working in these real world code bases that a lot of people just do not have. They have the craziest wide variety of data and chat histories they can use to do reinforcement learning and training on the models. You guys might remember this article from earlier this year from Anthropic, where they talked about detecting and preventing distillation attacks, where they claimed that labs like DeepSeek stole 150,000 exchanges, as in back and forths with the model, in order to train and refine their own model. I can't properly put into words how absurd this is, particularly this number. 150,000 exchanges is nothing. Since I started recording this video, Cursor's probably done 150,000 exchanges 150,000 times. This is not much data at all. T3 chat does more than this with Anthropic models daily. This is not a number that matters. I do want to be very, very clear because I see people already confused. Cursor is not using your data if you have privacy mode on. I know this for a fact because I had issues with Cursor when I had privacy mode on, and they literally could not debug with me because they had no way to access anything. I ended up turning off privacy mode just so I could work with the team more. So our friends at Anthropic seem to think 150,000 exchanges with an Anthropic model is enough for DeepSeek to steal their reasoning capabilities across diverse tasks. How much do you think you can do with hundreds of thousands of times more data? Because obviously Cursor has insane amounts, as well as all of their own internal work. I would bet that employees at Cursor using Cursor with Opus alone is way over this number. They have a lot of data. And while reinforcement learning is far from a perfect technique, it has proven to work really well in these types of scenarios. When you have a ton of good or good enough data that shows what a successful run looks like, especially if you can verify the results at the end in some way, you can now train models with that after they're already trained. The pre-training kind of gives the models their intelligence and knowledge, and this type of reinforcement learning and post-training gives them better behaviors and just overall more likely to comply with the systems that they work in. And that's where we get to today's drama, which is the involvement with Kimi. As I mentioned in the intro, this started because Finn found in the APIs that the model was named Kimi K2.5 Reinforcement Learning 0317 S515 Fast. So what happened here? Well, the first thing that happened was an employee at Kimi and Moonshot being very confused because they had not heard anything about this. This is an important detail because it means that the knowledge that this model was being used by Cursor was not very prolific within the Moonshot team. This is particularly important because of the modified MIT license they're using. Our only modification part is that if the software or any derivative works thereof is used for any of your commercial products or services that have more than 100 million monthly users or more than $2 million or equivalent in monthly revenue, you shall prominently display Kimi K2.5 on the user interface of such product or service. So as far as we understand, and as far as I would ever guess, this would be in violation of this license. But nobody's really tested this yet. And I said this the last time I covered this type of license in a video, and almost every time before it too. This modification isn't something that's been tested in the courts yet. We don't know what this actually works for. And we also don't know how much you can obfuscate. If you had a middleman, for example, you made your own new corporation, that's thing was reselling Kimi K2.5, and you sold that back to your own business for the 100 million monthly users or the $20 million in revenue, that shell company you put between the two could be the thing that displays Kimi K2.5, and then it sells a service to another company that doesn't enforce that isn't affected because they're not agreeing to this license. The company between the two agreed to the license. This company's just buying a service. This is an important distinction for reasons that you will learn momentarily. As speculation caught fire on Twitter, Lee Robb, everyone's favorite, came in out of nowhere and actually had some really good things to say. Composer 2 started from an open source base. We will do full pre-training in the future. As I mentioned before, the pre-training is how you get a lot of the knowledge into the model. It's the process where you take a shitload of data and do a bunch of transformations on it to try and make the set of parameters that represent the knowledge that it is capable of. RL is mostly a post-training process. But what's really interesting here is the compute split. Kimi K2.5 is a great model. As someone who's been a fan of Moonshot and Kimi for a while, this was a very fun week for me because I've been saying for a bit that the Kimi models are underrated and really good. To this day, Kimi K2 is the default model in T3 checks. I think it's one of the best options for just talking to a model. Its prose is great. Its knowledge is more than good enough. It's fast. It's nice. It's just a good model. I genuinely enjoy using it a lot. And 2.5 was much smarter and more capable, slightly worse at writing, but still really good overall. Turns out Cursor agreed and chose Kimi K2.5 as the base model that they would do all of their RL on using their insane amount of data, all of their harnesses, all of the other stuff they've built with their small team of researchers to try and make Kimi the best coding model per price. And that's why they chose to use Kimi K2.5 as the starting point for this crazy pile of post-training and RL on an existing model so they could try and make it the best coding model for the price ever. They wanted a really good coding model that worked great in their harness, that they could serve for cheap and really fast. And they went well past what I would imagine even they thought they'd be able to do with this strategy, taking this model that was pretty good before and bumping it to be in the GPT-5 tier of capability according to their own benchmarks is nuts. They did run it on other external code benches like Terminal Bench 2, where it still outscored Opus 4.5 and 4.6. Seems to be a good code model. And having used it a bunch myself, it's a pretty dang good model. It makes dumb mistakes here and there. You have to steer it every once in a while, but it's so cheap and so fast that I find it really nice to use. It's also pretty good at design. Shout out to Dara, by the way, for making this very useful website where I can compare runs on a specific prompt with and without the Anthropic design skill across various models. I think this will be fun. Here's an example of a design that was made with Composer 2.0 for this example site. I think this looks quite good. And we look through these. Yeah. I hate these retro blue, pink, glowy styles, but the other ones all look really solid. These aren't bad. And if we compare to Kimi K2.5, there's definitely overlap in some of these designs. But overall, the Composer ones are slightly better. Not a lot better, but enough better that it's pretty cool. I still think Opus 4.6 with the front-end design skill is the most reliable for good designs overall, but it's actually the gap's not that big here. I think Composer kind of cooked. Yeah, good shit. Yeah, I'm impressed. Composer did very well here. It's a good model. It's very solid. And the speed and price is insane. Their default version does 80 to 100 TPS, and it costs basically nothing. Yeah, 50 cents per million in and $2.50 per million out. For comparison, Opus is $5 per million and $25 per mil out. Yes, that means it's exactly 10x cheaper than Opus 4.6. That is insane. But that doesn't mean they can just get away with this. So back to these posts. Turns out that post-training is very valuable because Kimi K2.5 didn't get close to any of these numbers. And that's because Kimi K2.5 was only representative of a fourth of the compute they used for the training here. K2.5 is the model we all have access to download and use however we want. You can use it through OpenRouter, whenever. They put 3x additional compute into the post-training based on their estimates. I don't know if they actually know how much compute went into the original model or not, but with their assumptions, they did 3x more on top in order to make this model so much better at code and also worse at other things. That's why their evals are very different, because the model's effectively a whole different model. I really want to emphasize how big of a deal this is. Most of the major model releases from the major labs are not a new pre-training base. The pre-training is the first step. It's almost like a template in a way, and then they do a bunch of refinement after to turn that into the models we actually like to use. Most models start as like an autocomplete model with a bunch of information in them, but they're not good at talking or tool calling or all these other things. And then post-training brings those behaviors out. Models like GPT-5 and 5.1 were based on the same pre-training. 5.2 onwards also seem to all be the same pre-training. Gemini 3 to 3.1 was a post-training change. The pre-training was the same. It is very common for labs to take existing models and use post-training to make them behave entirely differently in ways that are often massive wins. What we haven't seen before, though, is a lab using post-training to put out something that gets frontier-level numbers by doing this post-training on someone else's model. But to go back to a thing I mentioned earlier about this license, and in particular, the ability to obfuscate who's responsible by having a middleman, Lee Rob says here, we are following the license through our inference partner terms. Sometimes being inserted into the middle of something like this is good, just like we're about to insert an ad in the middle of this video. Engineers hate meetings, but there's one thing I know they hate way, way more. Interviews, especially with bad candidates. And I'll be real, it's hard to find the good ones now with all the AI slop clogging up our inbound forms. It's just impossible to get the good people out. Unless you're using today's sponsor, G2I. These guys get hiring. They have an incredible network of engineers ready to go and one of the best possible platforms to find who's the right fit. You talk with them about what you're looking for, you send them some questions to ask the candidates, and then they send you videos of the candidates responding to try and find the right vibes. I know a ton of candidates and companies that have had a great time with G2I, and that's why big companies like Webflow, 1Password, Automatic, and Meta are all working with them to hire the best engineers. I wouldn't believe this either, but I've hung out with these guys a ton. They do really get it. React Miami is my favorite developer conference by far, but they might one-up it this year because they just announced the AI Engineer Miami conference. Yes, they're bringing AI to Miami. Sure, a lot of people will hate it, but us developers are going to love the excuse to be there. So if you're in Florida, or you can be for April 20th and 21st, I would highly recommend being there. You can bet your ass you're going to see me there too. Hire some great engineers and maybe come party at soydev.link/G2I. Sorry about that. As I was saying, the model has an inference partner that allowed Cursor to not have to disclose by saying Kimi K2.5 in the UI. Lee Rob replied here, since people really want me to say this, Kimi K2.5. Yes, that is the base we started from, and we are following the license through inference partner terms, in this case, Fireworks. If you're not familiar with Fireworks, they're a compute platform for hosting open weight models and using them to do fast inference. They also provide infra for people who want to do their own post-training, which seems to be where a lot of the inference that Cursor was running was run. And because people were still speculating about this, eventually Kimi came out and said what effectively Cursor was saying as well. Congrats to the Cursor AI team on the launch of Composer 2. We are proud to see Kimi K2.5 provide the foundation. Seeing our model integrated effectively through Cursor's continued pre-training and high compute RL training is the open model ecosystem we love to support. Note, Cursor accessed Kimi K2.5 via Fireworks AI's hosted RL and inference platforms as part of an authorized commercial product in partnership. This is the important piece. Since Cursor is going through Fireworks, and Fireworks is disclosing properly to Cursor that they're using Kimi K2.5, this is how they get around that license. I knew this would be a thing. In fact, I speculated as much in the past that this type of thing would allow for people to hide what model they're using, even if it's not within the spirit of the license. I think it's important for businesses to honor the spirit of these licenses in general. We're still so early in all of this. Nobody knows what we can and can't do, like technically speaking, much less legally speaking, across all of these things. This is the first time I've seen someone try and, more importantly, succeed in skirting the license. How big of a deal is this is up for debate. Personally, I would have liked at the very least for the Cursor team to have come out and said that their new model is a post-trained, refined, different version of Kimi K2.5 and try to take the opportunity to educate us. Because people seem to think that this is them just stealing the model and rebranding it as theirs and not changing much about it. It's not that. This is them working very hard to make the best possible thing in their tools, using an insane amount of compute and research and time, and then not properly disclosing what the starting point was. I don't like that. I think this isn't within the spirit of open weight models. And obviously open weight does not mean open source. You don't have all of the things you need to recreate the model from scratch yourself just because it's open weight. But open weight is open weight. It means the starting point is out there for people to do things with. And the whole point of doing that is so we can build on top of it and do cool things with what we have. The weird part here is that traditionally with open source, we expect that to be independent groups, side projects, hobbyists, and people like that building on top. But all you can really do with an open weight model is run it on your own GPUs, unless you have hundreds of millions of dollars to spend trying to adjust it to do different things, which is what Cursor can do. So it's one of the few times we have actually had a company that could use these models to do something bigger and bolder than we had seen before. I don't think there's been anything like this in the past, but I do think there's going to be a lot more things like this going forward. As companies are integrating these models and they're trying to get out of the absurd pricing subsidization wars that companies like Anthropic and OpenAI are doing, they need an edge. Open weight models are that edge in a lot of ways because the prices are just absurdly cheaper. As I had mentioned before, Opus's pricing is expensive. We're talking $5 per million tokens in and $25 per million out. If you look at Kimi K2.5, it's closer to 45 cents per million and $2.20 per mil out. So Cursor's charging a little bit more than that, but not much. Or if you look at models like GLM5, 72 cents per mil in and 230 per mil out. Huge gap. These are 10x or more cheaper. And they're not 10x dumber. They're like 20% dumber for 20x cheaper. That's insane. So if you're trying to deal with the 25x subsidization that is being done by companies like Anthropic, where you spend 200 and get 5 grand, well, if you find a model that's way cheaper, 10 to 20 times cheaper, you can cover a lot of that subsidization gap. But those models are not as good at a lot of things, in particular, coding. So what if you were willing to compromise on everything else just to focus on the coding side and make something that was really good at that? And that's what we now have with Composer. The pretty dang cool, powerful model. I just wish they had shared a bit more and took the opportunity to educate us about what this type of post-training looks like, instead of us having to start a whole bunch of drama, flame my and everyone else's DMs in the process. And now I'm here filming on a Saturday evening just to make sure we all understand what happened. There is one last thing here I think is worth covering. The long-term impact. Dax posted this before things had settled down, but I think it's as relevant now as ever. Whether this being the drama around using Kimi K2.5 is true or not, it's going to cause every company producing open source models to reevaluate if they should continue to do so. That is incredibly frustrating. I agree. There's a very good chance that Cursor ends up making more money on Kimi K2.5 than Moonshot does. Hell, there's a good chance that they spent more money doing this post-training on Kimi K2.5 than Moonshot has had in the entire history of their business. That sucks. And if you're one of those small labs that is fighting to make these powerful models and the only way you can get people interested is releasing them open weight, you're now looking over your shoulder like, should we even be doing this? And that's a scary thing because we need these open weight models in order to keep things progressing. All the cost improvements we've seen across the flagship models are because the open weight models got cheaper and better enough that these companies have to rethink things. And I really hope we don't lose that as a result of how this release went. So wrapping up, Composer is a good model. Kimi K2.5 is also a good model. They are very, very different models. A lot of money was spent in order to train Composer 2, and they definitely should have disclosed the fact that Composer 2 was being built on top of Kimi K2.5. Everyone kind of screwed up here. I think the license terms are not clear enough and also are not well defined enough for us to know what they really mean in practice. I think Fireworks didn't do a good enough job disclosing and forcing that disclosure to go down the pipeline, and I really don't think Cursor did a great job with their disclosures here either. I am disappointed in how they handled all of this, but I am thankful that they are acknowledging their failures and trying to do better in the future. I hope, fingers crossed, this is the last time we see something like this from Cursor, but I have a bad feeling that not only will they do something like this again, but many other companies will too. We are now in an era where having cheap enough compute to compete with Anthropic and OpenAI really, really matters. And the ways companies get there are going to get more interesting and probably more problematic before things settle down. Let me know how y'all feel about this. And until next time, peace, nerds.